Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Thursday, September 19th. Grace and I will discuss our offensive keys to the game for Baylor against Colorado on Saturday. Every week we do this and just kind of give our overview of what Baylor needs to do to win the football game, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. On Friday, we'll do defense. And it's truly just an overview of how we see this matchup going and where Baylor can take advantage of their opponent and what they're going to do. So, Grace, I'll toss it up to you for your number one, and we'll go from there. So what's your first key to this game for Baylor in Colorado?
I think the top priority for me just kind of going into this game is how does Baylor's offensive line handle Colorado's pass rush? I think that's going to be a key to this game because I do believe there's going to be opportunities throwing the football, which I'll get to in a little bit, but specifically the offensive line has to hold up. They didn't hold up well enough against Utah. They had moments here and there, but in general, it wasn't enough, especially when Baylor couldn't run the football. So I think it's going to be key that this group comes together. It's going to be key that they figure out who their best five are going into this game. Hopefully that's pretty much settled now. I think there's maybe only one or two position battles still going on there, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. If guys underperform, I expect them to get replaced during the game, and we'll just kind of have to see from there. But I do believe that's critical for Baylor to have success offensively is protecting their quarterback, whoever that may be, likely Sawyer Robertson, but they got to give him time to make throws because I do think there will be opportunities there.
Yeah, so to note, Colorado is actually missing some guys currently. One guy for the season is starting nose tackle. I don't have the names in front of me. And then their starting nose tackle, who is out in their most recent game, could potentially be back. And you look at that defensive line in 3 games, they have 1.33 sacks per game for Colorado, while Baylor's giving up 1.67. So kind of a weakness for Baylor and a weakness for Colorado. You kind of want to see how that plays out. I'm with you. Like if Baylor can protect and kind of hold off their pressure, obviously it sets up everything better because if you're giving up sacks, obviously you're going backwards, and that's for any team. That's not just for Baylor. So a really interesting matchup there. And truthfully, like I was really encouraged what I saw from Sawyer Robertson, if he is indeed the starter tomorrow, getting the ball out. That's going to help the offensive line a ton. If you're back there holding the ball for a while, you're more than likely going to be in some trouble. You're running around a little bit. But if you're able to get rid of the ball, it negates that pass rush. And that's what you want from the spread. And Sawyer showed the ability to make quick reads and understand where he was going with the football. And now the competition ramps up. I'm anxious to see if he can do that again.
I am too. And I think his mobility is going to be key, as it would be with Fenn as well. They got to be able to avoid sacks and create some time on their own. And that's something that is still a question mark about Sawyer. It 100% should be. After last year, I believe his pressure turning to sack rate was like 25% or something ridiculously high like that. So he's got to be able to create some of these opportunities on his own, because we know it's not going to be perfect up front. There are going to be times where he's going to have to extend the play with his feet. And if he can do that, again, there will be openings there. And we'll talk about a few more of those, but I do think that Sawyer is set up to succeed as long as he's not on his back multiple times throughout this game.
Yeah. So I think in a way, my first point plays to this, and it starts with being physical, right? It starts with the running game. And I don't necessarily need Baylor to go out and rush for 230 yards again. I don't know if that's realistic, but they have to maintain a running game throughout this game. So in 3 games, Baylor's averaging 40 rush attempts per game. And that's a high number. That's number 3 in the Big 12 right now. And if you really look at this team, you don't think about that because of the way they've ran the ball until the Air Force game, and they finally found some success. So what that tells me is they want to run the football to keep this all going. We've heard Spavital mention it. We've heard Coach Aranda mention this. Just run the ball. You have to run the ball to set up the rest of the offense. And that doesn't mean you have to go out there and rush for 200-plus yards in this particular game. But if you cannot run the ball and you just say we're giving up on it, then that creates a lot of issues. It makes you one-dimensional. And so I'm really curious to see how Baylor can have any type of success, or if they do have any success against Colorado, and how long that's maintained. And if you look at Colorado's last 6 games against major conference opponents, the teams who keep the ball away from Colorado's offense have a better chance. They're 0-6 in their last 6 games against major conference opponents, and they're averaging 17 points per game, mainly because their offense does not have the ball. And so the recipe's there for Baylor to take advantage of that. Now, is it 3 yards per carry? I think that could potentially get it done. You just don't want to get where you just abandon it completely.
Right. And I think it's interesting because Colorado fans will tell you that their run defense is good. And that's fine. I think in general, they have been good, but they have also been prone to giving up explosive runs. They've been prone to giving up quarterback rush yards like they did against North Dakota State. So in general, people may not like the fact that they've given up they're giving up 145.7 yards per game. They might not think that that's a real number, but it is a real number. It's kind of who they have been so far. And we're talking about teams like North Dakota State, Nebraska, Colorado State. Those are not high-powered offenses. Those are, I would say, right in the range with Baylor. And Baylor's, I think, 58th in the country rushing yards-wise, which is right behind Nebraska at 57th. And Nebraska ran for 149 yards and averaged 4.3 yards per carry. So, again, I think there is a stat there that does speak to Baylor potentially walking away from this game with right around somewhere between 130 and 150 rushing yards, which in my eyes is plenty for Baylor to be successful on offense.
Yeah, for sure. And if you look at Baylor's yards per carry through 3 non-conference games, and that includes Utah, which is a non-conference game, even though it doesn't count towards it in the standings, they're averaging 4.15 yards per carry, which is 10th in the Big 12 currently. And then Colorado's defense is 11th in the Big 12 at 4.01 yards per carry. So again, another one of these is kind of weakness versus weakness on the surface. It's which team can say, yes, our trend was better than your trend. I think Baylor's trend right now is that there's more confidence in running the ball after Air Force. Colorado saying we feel there's confidence in stopping the run, especially if we get some of our guys back from injury. We don't know until we get into this game. It's just truly which one proves us wrong or proves us right, because no trends at this point say either one's that dominant of a particular unit.
Right. And I think that's an important thing to mention. No one can sit here and say this is exactly who these two teams are, but I do think we have a pretty good idea of kind of what they're good at, what they're not good at, where they've had some flaws in their game. And I personally think that kind of both sides are looking into the most recent performance probably a little bit too much and thinking that, okay, that's who they are now. And I think both kind of need to realize that the two teams they played are not good and not equivalent to what they're about to face the rest of this season. So I think that is important to mention. My next key to this game goes right in line with the fact of the offensive line blocking, its efficiency at the quarterback position. I brought this up when we were doing our preview, but the two teams they lost to, North Dakota State and Nebraska, both of their quarterbacks completed over 76% of their passes. There are easy throws available against this defense. If you can create enough time for the quarterback in the pocket, if you can run the ball somewhat effectively, there's going to be layup type opportunities. And they both kind of did it differently, right? North Dakota State ended up with 292 yards passing. I'm sure Colorado fans have a hidden stat that say that didn't really happen, but 292 yards passing against North Dakota State is pretty bad. And then you look over to the Nebraska game, and they only gave up 185 yards passing, but again, 76.7% completion rate. That one was all about hitting on the layups. moving the chains, getting first downs, continuing to run the offense efficiently while leaning in a run game that was just kind of hammering out 4 yards, a little over 4 yards every time they got the ball. So those two strategies definitely worked against Colorado in two different ways. But in general, it came down to being efficient, passing the football, hitting on the layups, and then eventually when you have some opportunities, creating a couple explosive plays here and there.
Yeah, and I think what we know, and obviously we watched Matt Rule at Baylor for 3 years, if he's getting a lead, there's not a lot of extra. He's going to run the ball at you and try to melt the clock. And I think we saw that against Colorado. Not to say that Nebraska could have named their score. I don't feel that way. I feel like that Nebraska's game plan in general the entire season will be to protect a young quarterback, run the football, and rely on its defense. And so, but I do think that if they needed to throw it more, they needed to challenge a little more, they would have. And they didn't see those opportunities against Colorado specifically. And I'm with you, like 75% passing, that's a high number. And I don't think that you can necessarily bank on getting 75% passing, but it really depends on what the defense is giving you. If Colorado is kind of fearful in a way of explosive plays by Baylor's offense, which Baylor does a decent job of creating explosive plays right now, then maybe you say that the underneath throws, the easy throws are there, and that completion percentage goes up. We just don't know how Colorado is going to test Baylor's offense right now. And I'm anxious to see that. And I think Sawyer probably in the passing game, in a design passing game situation, he's going to give Baylor more success. So if he plays, that's what's to watch for is, do the chains move? And if he can get them to move and make the throws where they're supposed to be, it's going to be available to him. And it all plays hand in hand in this offense. If you're running the game, if you're running in the game, if you're throwing in the game, you better be pretty efficient. You don't want to have tackles for loss. You don't have a lot of incompletions to just stop the drives. And I'm anxious to see it. And as far as my third point, I mean, these all go together. As we know, we're talking about the offensive side of the ball. You need them to work together, but avoid turnovers. Baylor did not do that. I mean, it had been an issue a little bit, but a lot of these were just unforced issues. It wasn't like Utah where the fumble was because of a sack. It was guys just not holding onto the ball. All three of the fumbles just hold on to the football. Air Force specifically played physical. They had a lot of hard hits, and you expect that from Air Force that forced some stuff. But in general, you have to protect the ball. And especially in a road environment like this, where in a game that you expect to be close and you need point scores, you can't give up empty possessions where you're moving the ball. It's one thing truly to say, hey, we fumbled at the 45-yard line on a 3rd and 5 that we weren't going to get anyways. But it's another thing is when you're efficiently driving the ball down the field and you just give them a gift. They can't do that if they expect them to win this game. You're looking at a spread that's less than 3 points in favor of Colorado. That means that considering it's in Boulder, this game's expected to be a close game. You can't give up freebies to Colorado, especially an offense like that can score in a hurry if you give an opportunity to.
Right. And I did feel like Baylor's were pretty careless. The turnovers were just kind of being loose with the football. All three of them, really. I mean, I know there's a level of physicality you want to play with, but it's got to be smart physicality. And sometimes it's better to just fall down or get out of bounds than it is to try to engage contact and risk fumbling the football. So it is something to look forward to and kind of, hopefully they address it. Hopefully they fix it. Sometimes turnovers are about luck for sure. But I did feel like a couple of those were just about, one of those things where, yeah, you're trying to be physical, but you still got to take care of the football. And it cost Baylor a few times against Air Force and really kept that game from being, 40-6 or 45-9 or something along those lines. It could have been a lot worse for Air Force on the day if Baylor had just taken care of the football. So you're exactly right. You go on the road and start doing that, I mean, you could risk losing by 20 points, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And that goes back to, we're going to talk about the offense, Colorado's offense, Baylor's defense tomorrow, but you don't want to give Sanders and those explosive playmakers a short field, much less a long field. Like, they're already dangerous, and you're going to have to be very meticulous in how you're defending them. But if you give them the ball at the 40-yard line, even your own 40-yard line or their own 40-yard line, like that short of a field when you can potentially punt and pin them inside the 10, that's a major difference. And you're going to have to force their offense to be efficient. But if they're starting in your own territory because of fumbles, they don't have to be as efficient. And I'm really anxious to see. Coach Anderson mentioned it in regards to Michael Trigg's fumble against Air Force of, hey, we know you're making a play, but at this point in the play, they're going to get you down without you getting more than 1 or 2 yards. Just go down. And I don't think that like Bryson Washington's fumble was one of those, like he got tripped up at the last minute. It was just kind of a bang, bang play, but he could have easily run out of bounds. So he could have got out of bounds trying to fight for the yards. Dawson Pendergrass is in a lot of ways. We see him do it all the time where he's struggling through. We saw it all last year. We've seen it this year where he's kind of struggling through the line, getting 2 or 3 more yards. You want him to continue doing that, but you have to be very careful with the ball at the same time. So no, I think turnovers are a big part of this, and sorry to take up more time, but jump on your number 3 right here.
Right. So my third one, I think this is actually going to be one of those things where we're going to figure out if this is a trend or not from Colorado. The Buffaloes have only played one true dual threat quarterback, a guy that can actually make them pay running the football at the quarterback position. And it was the first game of the year, and I believe they gave up 81 yards rushing against North Dakota State's quarterback. Whereas in their 2 most previous games, those were not running quarterbacks. Raiola and then Braden out at Colorado State. Those 2 guys, not good runners with football. So I'm very curious. I think Baylor did this on purpose. They didn't really run Sawyer Robertson very much at all. He had the touchdown run, but there wasn't a lot to that. I think probably with DeQuan Finn out, they were probably being extra cautious as well with that. But with both of them ready to go, I don't see any reason why you're not going to see a few quarterback designed runs and really try to load up and have extra blockers for Robertson and use his 220-pound frame to get you 4 or 5 yards or create an explosive play or be a threat in that regard, because in Colorado's only game against a guy who can run the football and is as athletic, maybe a little more athletic than Sawyer, but still kind of built in that same mold, they struggled. And so I do think that will actually end up being a focal point and something that does help Baylor's overall rushing numbers and rushing environment as they go on the road and try to get this win. They have to run the football. They got to find ways to be physical. I think that's a way they can do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with Sawyer before his ankle injury last year against Utah. He ran pretty well. And then truly that might have changed the direction of that game last year whenever he got the ankle. He continued to play, but he was just limited. Then you go to the last game against West Virginia last year, and he ran in that. He was scrambled in that game and ran in that game as well. And then we saw it in the first game. I mean, in this most recent game this year of his start against Air Force, he's mobile enough. And then you consider the fact that he's 6'4", 220. He's not a small guy either. So it's, he's falling and he might get 2 additional yards because he's falling and stumbling where, a smaller guy might go down a little bit quicker. So I'm anxious to see, but I think too, I mean, DeQuan Finn, his legs are always going to be a threat. There's ways to eliminate it, but if he's playing in this game, like there's potential, even if he's not the starter, but he's available, you might see some opportunities for him to get in and run the football. You don't want to do it and risk injury to him. And then you're without a backup again for the most part. Nate Bennett's there. But you might rather ride it out to see if he needs to come in. But it's always a threat, especially Coach Aranda mentioned it. Like they're going into this game hoping they have both of them. And it sounds like they will have both of them available. And that's just a game planning gamesmanship from Coach Aranda. And you want that. Their skill sets are diverse enough that I believe that it makes sense to do something like that. Now, they're very similar quarterbacks, or one was just flat out bad. Then it becomes a different conversation. But for all sake, like you absolutely take advantage of having 2 quarterbacks potentially available, considering they have drastic different strengths in their games.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I do think that they should roll with the starter unless the starter isn't moving the football. That's just always kind of been my mindset on it. But I also agree, there could be something for one of the guys to come in, if it's Fenn, especially to come in and utilize his legs some. But I kind of would like them to stick with one and utilize the strengths that Sawyer does have, as more of a power physical runner. And Sawyer's not going to give you a ton as far as creation running. Like sometimes he's athletic enough to do it. We saw it on the 2-point conversion, but in large part, he's just really good at the designed runs, the QB power type things. He does a nice job with that. So I think that will be something they utilize. Maybe they use it with Quan Finn as well. But I just think it's a nice little wrinkle and a stat, kind of a trend that I'm looking forward to seeing if Colorado has adjusted to what happened to them the first game of the year, or if it's something that's going to plague them throughout the season when opposing offenses are able to have extra blockers and they're facing a mobile quarterback.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so that leads me into point number 3. We talk about quarterback play, talk about not turning it over. I mean, it's truly start fast at this point. Like there's nothing, you go in with a scripted set of plays. You kind of know what Colorado is going to do defensively at this juncture until they make their adjustments. You have to start fast. I mean, you go in, if you can take the crowd out of it early, especially for a team that still has concerns in general about what they are as a team and what they're capable of. If you get out early, it sets the precedent for the entire rest of the game. Baylor hasn't done that this year. Besides the Tarleton game, they didn't do it against Utah, obviously. They didn't do it against Air Force. Probably better than giving credit for against Air Force. They just fumbled the ball and gave it away. But if this offense can go out and score, get a touchdown early, it can change the mindset of the game pretty quickly for both sides of the ball.
That's key. They have not done that well, really, for a while with Dave Aranda as the head coach. And it's something that they've worked on addressing. They tried to do it this offseason. It really hasn't happened. Against Air Force and Utah, they did not start fast at all. They started extremely slow and very disappointing. You do that on the road at Colorado. Again, there's a chance that you look up at the score after the first quarter and it's 14-0 or 17-3 if you don't start strong. And then you're trying to come back in a crazy environment. That's a recipe for disaster. And that's how you end up getting blown out on the road. So I do think that's very important. I think it takes the crowd out of it a little bit. I also think it just settles down the team in general. When you get off to a strong start, it allows everyone to just, okay, play to the technique. We're settled into this game. We don't have to overthink it. Don't have to overplay things. Don't have to go against technique because you're just so hyped and so excited. You can just calm down and play football. I think that's very important for Baylor to probably get out of the first quarter with either a lead or a tie. I think would be very ideal.
Yeah. All right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. For Grayson Grunhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great Thursday and Sick 'em Bears.